Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namasami. So today we're going to continue with the Honey Ball Sutta, the Madhu Pindika Sutta. It's also known as a honey cake. This is Bhante Sujato's translation. And it's a really important sutta. It's one of the three suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya that are dealing with thought. And so some people have dubbed it the thought trilogy, part one of the suttas in the thought trilogy in the Majjhima Nikaya. And those three, actually, it's the first sutta, but I've taken them out of order when I've shared the teachings on them. And so Honeyball is first, Majjhima Nikaya number 18. The Dvaita Vitaka is second. It's a Majjhima Nikaya 20, and 18, 19, sorry, 19. And then the Vitaka Santana is the third. So that's Majjhima Nikaya number 20. So I could start with looking at doing somewhat of a review of the sutta. So I'm going to share the document that I prepared, and I'll just kind of summarize maybe before I start the share screen. This is the Buddha was in seclusion and meditating, and this Shakyan, a relative of the Buddha, approached him. This is Dandapani approaching him with a walking stick, and so he was named Dandapani because he always walked with a stick, even though he wasn't elderly. So they got this nickname. And then he approached the Buddha, and he, leaning on his stick, asked, after some cordial talk, what does the Buddha proclaim? What is this? What is his doctrine? And sometimes people do that in order to get into debate. And so that was a thought that some people have, that he wanted to get into a debate with the Buddha. And then, so then I'm going to go to the document to share the document to say what the Buddha had. I think this is it. This should share it with to say in response. So here, the Buddha says, "Friend, I assert and proclaim my teaching in such a way that does not quarrel with anyone in the world, with its gods, its maras, its brahmas, in this generation with its recluses and Brahmins, its princes and people, in such a way that perceptions no more underlie that Brahman who abides detached from sensual pleasures, without perplexity, shorn of worry, free from craving for any kind of being." And last week, I just took this extract from the connected discourses, and show that the Buddha does not wish to dispute with anyone or quarrel with anyone in the world. He says he doesn't quarrel, but it is the world that disputes with me. So he just holds to what he knows is truth, and then other people may try to argue with him. And then he says, when your speech is in line with the teaching, you do not dispute with anyone in the world. And so then the Buddha, after the Dandapani departs kind of abruptly, he makes some kind of facial expression and wagging his tongue, and then he walks off, leaning on his stick. If he was confused, that would have been the time for him to ask a question. So then the Buddha goes back to the monastery and tells the monks what happened. And then one of the monks says, but sir, asserting what doctrine does the Buddha not argue with anyone in the world? Welcome. So I'm just doing a review, and you're just in time. So this bhikkhu does ask a question of the Buddha. What did you mean by that statement? And he says, Bhikkhu, as to the source through which perceptions and notions born of mental proliferation beset a person, says a man, but if nothing is found there to delight in, welcome and hold to, this is the end of the underlying tendency to lust, of the underlying tendency to aversion, of the underlying tendency to views, of the underlying tendency to doubt, of the underlying tendency to conceit, of the underlying tendency to desire for being, of the underlying tendency to ignorance. This is the end of resorting to rods, weapons, quarrels, brawls, disputes, recrimination, malicious words, and false speech. Here, these evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. So that was the Buddha's brief statement. This is Bhante Sujato's translation, but I'm going to go over it because this is a review. And then I had last week I talked about this word that appears. Excuse me. This papancha sanya sankha appears. And Bhante Sujata translates it as judgments driven by proliferating perception. And so we see that papancha is a well-known word in Buddhist circles, Theravada Buddhism, and that people would mostly think of it as proliferation. That's what the most common translation I've heard. Endless conceptualization, expanding and spreading is kind of more a sense of it. And then sanya is perception, and sankha is a measurement, enumeration, calculation. So this is like the mind kind of spinning off and thinking about things, measuring, enumerating, calculating. You can see that in yourself. When your mind starts to proliferate, this can be one of the aspects of it. And then here are the underlying tendencies that were listed on the Pali. And if you want to memorize these, this is where you'll find it in brief in the Samyutta Nikaya 45.175. And these are good to know because if we see them in ourselves, then we can weaken them. We can't completely eliminate them until different stages of awakening. Some are weakened, but and then sense desire and repulsion will be eliminated at anagami. We've got a lot of work to do. So just being aware of them and weakening them is important, because then we don't have to be driven by them. This is part of the point of this sutta, is that these underlying tendencies are drives in our lives, and they cause a lot of trouble for ourselves and everybody else in the world. So the Noble Eightfold Path and understanding the Four Noble Truths is a way of overcoming these underlying tendencies. And these are the primary underlying tendencies. And if you can't, it's difficult for you to memorize all seven. Just be aware of these three and how weight enough. It's important to know the feeling, the tone, the hedonic tone, as some people call it. Influences our perception of things, and the feeling that comes up in response to pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feeling. So that's a really good way also with working with these underlying tendencies, is seeing the source actually of them. So this, now we're getting to part 2, and I'm going to close your eyes a second. I'm going to go over to the sutta, the translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Excuse me, Bhante Sujato. So we just went over this, where the bhikkhu has asked him, and the Buddha gives a brief statement. This is considered a brief teaching. And how is it that perceptions do not underlie the Buddha who lives detached? He repeats what the Buddha had said. And then if they don't find anything worth approving, welcoming, or getting attached to as to the source, which they were right, just this is the end of the underlying tendencies. And that's where these bad, unskillful qualities cease without anything left over. So this is different than the one I just read, because this is Bhante Sujato's, and I had just read Bhikkhu Bodhi's. And that's what the Buddha said. And when he spoke, the Holy One got up from his seat and entered his dwelling. Soon after the Buddha left, those mendicants considered. The Buddha gave this brief summary recital, then entered his dwelling without explaining the meaning in detail. So I think they probably were just kind of, I take it as they were just kind of a little bit dumbfounded. Wow, that's just kind of amazing what he just said. And then they say, well, what does that actually mean? Sometimes you kind of get it in your heart, and but then you don't fully understand it. And so I wanted to show here, this is a summary recital, but this is a synopsis, statement, and brief summary. So in the Buddha's teaching, there's a couple of classes of teaching. One is the summary, and then there's the detailed meaning. And sometimes we may hear the summary and then ponder it ourselves, and then discuss it. So who can explain the detailed meaning of this brief summary recital? So this is the summary and the extensive detail. So there's two types, as I was saying. So then they thought to go to Venerable Mahakachana. I'm just going to summarize this somewhat as we're going now, because it's repetitive. So they went And so they greeted with a polite conversation, and then they asked him, may the Venerable Mahakachana please explain this? And then so they repeated what the Buddha said, which is really beautiful that they were able to memorize just from the Buddha saying it once, and then go and to Mahakachana and tell him what the Buddha said. And then the Mahakachana at first refuses, saying, you know, or he's actually scolding them. Why didn't you ask the Buddha himself? Suppose a person was in need of heartwood, and while wandering in search of heartwood, he'd come to across, a large tree standing with heartwood, but he'd pass over the roots and trunk, imagining that the heartwood should be sought in the branches and leaves. So I guess you can get hard wood out of some of the root. But anyway, that's not so important. But the heartwood of the teaching, and so they're seeking it. He's saying in the wrong place, coming to him. So though you were face to face with the Buddha, you bypassed him, imagining you should ask me about the matter. And then they're, oh, please, please. For the Buddha, for the Buddha knows and sees, he has vision, he is knowledge, he is the manifestation of principle, the manifestation of divinity. He is the teacher, the proclaimer, the elucidator of meaning, bestower of freedom from death, the Lord of truth, the realized one. Well, that sounds extremely exalted. And so he's saying, now don't come to me, you who had the Buddha in front of you. And so, and that was the time to approach the Buddha and ask about the manner. And this is where they say, oh, please. I'm going through quickly because the heart of the matter is more important than this conversation. So they know that the Buddha is the exalted one, and they should have asked him, but would you please anyway tell us, because the Buddha, still Mahakachana, is praised by the Buddha, esteemed by his sensible spiritual companions, his wise companions, and you are capable of explaining in detail the meaning of this brief summary recital. So there are speakers that are known to have this ability. Please explain this if there's no trouble. And they said, well, then, reverence, listen, and I will apply your minds well, and I will speak. And so then, this is where the Mahakachana explains the brief meaning. Judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. Okay, I think this is ellipsed. Okay, now I've got it. Judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person if they don't find anything worth approving, welcoming, or getting attached to in the source from which they arise. Just this is the end of the underlying tendency to desire, repulsion, views, doubt, conceit, desire to be reborn. This is desire for existence and ignorance. It is the end of taking a broadsword, and of quarrels, arguments, disputes, accusations, divisive speech, and lies. This is where these bad, unskillful qualities cease without anything left over. This is how I understand the detailed meaning of this summary recital. So he's about to explain it. So this is also amazing that the monks told Mahakachana, Venerable Mahakachana, the brief summary recital, and he was able to just repeat it back to them. And then this I have in we could go back to the document after we go here. Eye consciousness arises dependent on eye and sights. The meaning of the three is contact. Contact is a requirement for feeling. What you feel, you perceive. What you perceive, you think about. What you think about, you proliferate. What you proliferate is the source from which judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person. This occurs with regard to sights known by the eye in the past, future, and present. So we're going to go back to the document. Okay, so I just captured that, where the monks are pleading with him, please explain this matter to us. So I won't reread it. So what he's saying, if they don't find anything worth approving, welcoming, or getting attached to in the source from which these arise, just this is the end of the underlying tendency to desire, repulsion, views, conceit, the desire for continued existence and ignorance. This is the end of taking up rod and sword, the end of quarrels, arguments, disputes, of accusation, divisive speech, and lies. So this is, I think this is Monte Sujato's translation of that again. And then, so they're here again. So we can go over this more slowly. And in the sutta, I'm just captured the part about the eye, but it talks about the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and consciousness. So all six sense gates. So eye consciousness arises dependent on the eye and sight. So the physical eye and what we see, the meeting of the three is contact. So this consciousness arises, like I look and I see my cup with tea in it. And then so there's the eye that, and the light coming off the cup, reflecting off the cup, and then my awareness, the consciousness, eye consciousness is triggered. And then that's contact. Contact is a condition for feeling. So I go, oh, there's my cup of tea. That's but I think immediately goes to mind consciousness because it's a pleasant sight to me because it's my cup of tea. And what you feel, you perceive. So these two actually are going together because it almost seems like what I perceive, I feel, because I have a perception that that's my cup there, this light reflecting off this object, and so there's awareness of and perception and feeling, these all kind of come together quite quickly. What you perceive, you think about. So then I think, oh, maybe I should have a sip of tea, right? So that's easy enough. That's simple enough. What you think about, you proliferate. So I might start thinking about how I'm running out of tea, suppose. And what can I do about getting more tea? Something. This is the proliferation. What you proliferate is the source from which judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person. So, so this is a little bit more complicated than just wanting tea. So we're getting involved in when we looked at the underlying tendencies, we saw all those about conceit and views and desire for rebirth. So this occurs with respect to sights known by the eye in past, future, and present. So memories, it'd be more of a wandering mind, but I might be with a cup of tea reminded of something, and then I go into a whole proliferation. But it would be more like if I'm being prevented from getting something I really want, and I'm perceiving a person as blocking me from that, and then that's when we get into battles, as human beings, fighting over resources, like, or yeah, somebody in the next country has all the uh, minerals that I need, or even other part of the world. So people go into war over material gain, or what they perceive as their need. Uh, but a lot of it is gain, or there's jealousy, or perceiving that someone has gotten something that is actually mine, or I should have, or something like that. And then anger comes up. So this is how this whole process works, starting with the eye, the ear, or hear a sound. A lot of it's filtered through the mind. That's why it gets into the proliferations. So I was wanting to point out here, a lot of people say that this is like dependent origination. There is a slice of dependent origination. It's not even in the same order. So this is some note I took a while ago. With sense contact, feelings arise. With feeling, craving arises. With craving, clinging arises. And all these reinforce one another. So I was in this, I was doing a study on Vedana, on feeling. And feeling is like a trigger for a lot of problems we have. So instead of feeling and perception and thinking arising, and this independent origination, it just goes to, it points directly to the source, I think, is one of the things. That craving is a can set this whole problem with proliferation as being the source of judgments driven by proliferating perceptions, and being beset by that, being assailed, your own mind assailing you and driving you into doing something that you regret later, or you want to justify as your right to do, or something like that, or whoever, not, um, so the dependent origination is actually talking about rebirth. So with ignorance as a condition, this is sankhara, volitional formations, and consciousness, and this propels us into the next birth. So we have ignorance, avijja pachaya, sankhara, and Bhante Sujato translates sankhara as choices, and he says this is having to do with the choices we make in former lives, propel us the way we live our lives. If we're a greedy person, it's going to propel us into a particular kind of birth. So the rebirth. So here it's talking about rebirth consciousness. Consciousness is a requirement for name and form, which is the form is the physical form, what we're born into physically, and then the nama is the mentality. And here we have the name and form are required. So we have to have a body and a mind for the six sense fields to be active. The six sense bases, and the sense bases are a requirement for contact, and contact is a requirement for feeling. So this is a little bit different formation, because we're talking about the rebirth consciousness, but this whole thing around contact at the sense gates or the sense fields, with being aware, there's contact. And then there's the feeling that arises. And then the feeling is a requirement for craving. Craving is a requirement for grasping. So I think these are underlying, these craving and grasping is underlying the perceptions and the thinking and the mental proliferation. This is kind of uh, a negative supporting force for getting into conflict. So grasping is for, so I was saying this is rebirth. This is talking about rebirth. But there is this active in the present life span, there's the active manifestation. But here it's spoken about differently. So I'm going to go back to the sutta. So I just wanted to show that there is an aspect of dependent origination, but this is actually it's a causal chain within this present lifetime. And looking at especially feeling and what's triggering feeling, what's coming up, is really important to be able to uproot this whole process. So these, I mean, it is interrelated, but it's this is spoken about in a different manner. So we went to look at that in detail. So then again it says ear consciousness arises dependent on ear and sound. Nose consciousness arises dependent on nose and smells. Tongue consciousness arises dependent on tongue and tastes. Body consciousness arises dependent on the body or body and touches. Mind consciousness arises dependent on mind and ideas. The meaning of the three is contact. Contact is a requirement for feeling. What you feel, you perceive. What you perceive, you think about. What you think about, you proliferate. What you proliferate is the source from which judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person. This occurs in respect to ideas known by the mind in past, future, and present. So any of these sense gates are going to trigger a feeling and a perception and thinking. And it all kind of merges in the mind. For a human being, all this proliferation is coming from, well, I guess if I hear a really loud sound, then I might be startled and it's unpleasant. So that would be direct to the ear. And then I think the neighbor is slamming the doors or something, or the trucks, hear loud trucks or so. And then I could get very annoyed and start blaming and want to make a big issue out of my neighbor is very quiet. I just we love her. But so these perceptions and thinking and all is in response to an unpleasant feeling, or I smell a terrible odor, and then I think, oh, somebody didn't dump the compost, and getting really angry. Now that I'm by myself, I think, oh, okay, now I know who the culprit is. I can't blame anybody. It's Ayanyadika is away for, yeah. So, if I'm wondering who was it, who didn't dump the compost, it was me. But in a situation, you can find somebody to blame for something and get angry for or the desire for more of something, a taste. Um, it's not enough that I've enjoyed the meal, I've got to get more, or had a little bit of dessert or something, and I have to get more, And so this is where these perceptions and thinking and proliferating, it's more serious than that, what the Buddha's talking about, because talking about picking up rods and swords and going into battle and arguing and such. So then this is interesting because big excuse me, Bhante Sujato has translated this in a way that um is actually quite useful, and says where there is an eye consciousness, it is possible to discover evidence of contact. So here's where we can start looking at this whole phenomena. And this is a beautiful thing. If we can stop it here, then we won't go, it doesn't go any further. I go, oh, there's actually with contact, feeling comes up almost. I mean, some people say it's impossible when there's contact that there is not a responding feeling. And there's a sutta, the Bahia Sutta, when there's the seen is only the seen and the heard is only the heard. This is where you could stop here, but I think you have to have been working with this for quite some time to stop it at this point. So most of us will be aware of a feeling, like be aware of the sound, a loud sound, and I'll say unpleasant feeling at the ear door. One time I one time I tripped and I was laying there thinking pain, pain, pain. And it was kind of just and then I assessed my body and I was okay. I hadn't hurt myself, when there was no injury, maybe a little bit of a scrape or something. But I remember it's just like, so you just stop there instead of going into this whole proliferation. I was like, oh, I was so stupid and blah, blah, blah. And why do people leave things in the way or whatever it is? I just was thinking pain, pain, pain. So I just stopped at feeling, which is an unpleasant feeling, and didn't proliferate. Why me? I'm carrying this heavy load and the ground is even and I trip and blah, blah, blah. I just thought pain, pain, and I checked myself and I was okay. So this is where there's an evidence of contact, it'll be possible to discover the evidence of feeling. But say I didn't stop there. Yeah. Where there is an evidence of feeling, it would be possible to discover evidence of perception. So then the perception comes in, and it all happens so quickly. But when we're developing this awareness of this whole process, and this is if we trace it, backwards from where we stop, like I stop at perception of I know that that's a cup. And I know that a pleasant feeling has arisen in response to that. I think, but the sight and the perception and the feeling, it's all so quickly interlaced. But in order to describe it, you have to kind of go, because you can't have a feeling without the perception. I mean, I could be meditating and then there's a loud sound and the body responds to it, like it's because it's so loud, it's unpleasant to the body and the ear door. And but I don't think about, oh, that's a loud truck. It can just be sound. It is possible that it just stays at sound without perceiving the perception of, oh, that's the garbage truck, and why do they then you get into why is it then there's evidence of perception, because perception happens quickly too, and I may just quickly know that that's a truck, and that's a garbage truck making a loud sound. And then but I don't think about it in verbal thought. It's just very quickly I dismiss it. But when I discover where there is perception, it will be possible to discover the evidence of thought. So then I get distracted from my meditation because the garbage truck and I think that's the garbage truck, and then I think, did I put out the trash or something, whatever, or annoyance, then the thought processes start going. Where there is an evidence of thought, it would be possible to discover evidence of being beset by judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. So I mentioned the ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, ideas, consciousness. So this is just a list of all that. It'll be possible to discover the evidence of contact. So the meeting of the mind and ideas and consciousness. Where there is the evidence of contact, it'll be possible to discover the evidence of feeling. Where there's the evidence of feeling, it'll be possible to discover the evidence of perception. Whereas there is the evidence of perception, it'll be possible to discover the evidence of thinking. Where there is the evidence of thinking, it'll be possible to discover the evidence of being beset by judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. So I think I've heard people speak this way, and then this is where I've gotten this understanding. I don't remember the source, but we can trace backwards when we see there's this proliferation, when we're feeling agitated by all this thinking about how to get something or how to avoid something, or all this mental proliferation that's going on. We can trace backwards. And if we start tracing backwards, it starts to calm the mind down. Vitaka Santana talks about relaxation of or calming of thought. And this is one of the ways I've heard it described, as you trace back to the source. It doesn't particularly point to the sutta itself, but we can see this whole process backwards. We just trace it back. We say, oh, I'm really worked up. My mind is really proliferating. What is the source of all this thinking, and what, the perception and feelings, what happened that triggered all that? It's often a memory of something, because it mentions about past, present, and future in the Buddhist brief statement, that these judgments and proliferations and perceptions of the past, present, and future. So sometimes they get all tangled together, because something something reminds me of something in the past, and then I'm projecting into the future to either get or avoid whatever it is, and this gets all tangled up. So if we just are aware of the, yeah, I heard that sound, or somebody said something and reminded me of something, or saw a photograph, or whatever it was. Ah, okay, this is where this is coming from. But as we are aware more and more of what's arising in us, if we can especially pay attention to Vedana, because that's the root or the primary anusayas, or underlying tendencies, arise from feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and then everything else develops from there. So if we're aware of this process, then we can start at least weakening it and stopping. Like I was saying, that person who's very deep in meditation may not even hear a sound. So this is where there is no, let's see, did I skip over? When there is no eye, no sight, no eye consciousness, it will not be possible to discover the evidence of contact. So this is it could be somebody who's party nibbana, but also the experience in really deep states of meditation. We're not, these sense gates are not engaged. We're not engaging with them. And so, or if we just don't, if we sit with our eyes closed, then we're shutting off a lot of stimulation. And this is why in this tradition, we sit with our eyes closed and we try to go to a quiet place as much as possible. So when there's no sights, no eye consciousness, it will not be possible to discover the evidence of contact. So reducing contact helps us with the meditation. There's no evidence of contact, it will not possible to discover the evidence of feeling. So mostly we're going to be dealing with our mind when we're sitting with our eyes closed and in a quiet place, and we feel a contact at our, the body. You might feel itchy or warm or hot or something, or cold. But here, if we've gotten into deep meditation, then this whole process is not active. Where there is no evidence of feeling, it will not be possible to discover evidence of perception. So this is really deep meditation, as if there's no feeling or perception. That's an extremely deep level of meditation. Where there is no evidence of perception, it would be possible to discover, it would not be possible, to discover the evidence of thinking. Whereas there is no evidence of thinking, it would not be possible to discover evidence of being beset by judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. So I think just for the average person to be able to at least stop being aware of feeling and perception and stop there. Where there is no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no ideas, no mind consciousness, it would not be possible to discover evidence of contact. So with the mind, and like in jhana, people like Ajahn Brahm says, it's impossible to think. You're just experiencing mind. And so there's consciousness, but there's no thinking. It's just impossible. It's a different kind of experience. So this has arrested this process at this point. And then the deeper states of meditation, as we get further and further withdrawn from the sensory world and perception, the ending of perception is a very deep state. You have to be anagami, I think, without when there's no feeling or perception. Where there is no evidence of contact, it will not be possible to discover evidence of feeling. Where there is no evidence of feeling, it will not be possible to discover evidence of perception. Where there is no evidence of perception, it will not be possible to discover evidence of thinking. Where there is no evidence of thinking, it will not be possible to discover evidence of being beset by judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. This is how I understand the detailed meaning of that brief summary recital given by the Buddha. Sadhu. So this is a very advanced teaching. It's but we can use that part when we can discover what is going on. I like the way Bhante Sujato had translates it. It makes it like accessible at that point to trace back and see what's going on. And like I was saying, trying to stop at feeling and perception and not going further into thinking and proliferating and all that. So then he says, if you wish, you may go to the Buddha and ask him about this. You should remember it in line with the Buddha's answer. So just go back and check with the Buddha, see that what I said is right. Then those mendicants approving and agreeing with what Mahakachana, Venerable Mahakachana said, rose from their seats and went to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and told him what happened. And so the Buddha replies, Mahakachana clearly explained the meaning to us in this. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I think this is the bhikkhus. Mahakachana clearly explained the meaning to us in this manner with these words and phrases. And this is where the Buddha answers. Mahakachana is astute mendicants. He has great wisdom. If you came to me and asked the question, I would answer it in exactly the same way as Mahakachana. That is what it means, and that is how you should remember it. So Ananda is there to remember it. He's one of the ones that is remarkable in his memory. When this is said, Venerable Ananda said to the Buddha, Sir, suppose a person who was weak with hunger were to obtain a honey cake. Wherever they tasted, they would enjoy a sweet, delectable flavor. In the same way, wherever a sincere, capable mendicant might examine with wisdom the meaning of this exposition of the teaching, they would only gain joy and clarity. So this is beautiful too, because he is talking about any place you look at it. So for us, we may be looking at that part of discernment when we're seeing what's actually arising in us. And then people who have more capacity in meditation would understand further on in the sutta. So then Ananda asks, Sir, what is the name of this exposition of the teaching? Well, then Ananda, you may remember this exposition of the teaching as the Honey Cake Discourse. That is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, Venerable Ananda approved of what the Buddha said. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So I'm going to stop the screen share. Yeah, I just thought I had to kind of book through the sutta because there's a lot in it. It is very I said it's like condensed like honey or something like that, and that's a very little bit of it. You can take a little bit of it and really gain a lot from it. So we just have a little bit of time for a question of, if you have a question about the sutta, and if you have question about other things, then you can just stay on and we can talk then. So if you can unmute yourself if you have a question, and if not, we'll end uh, with a homage to the triple gem. I'm moving my teacup out of the way so I don't cook it. Okay, so we'll end, and then please stay on, and we can have a little discussion. Araham Sama Sambuddho Bhagawa Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivademi. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Sangham Namami. Thank you so much for joining us.